Hello, today I will be teaching you a little about awk scripting, which is used in Unix quite a lot and is pretty important to know. This is because it's really fast and it's pretty simple to get the hang of after a while. It just executes really nicely compared to Perl or anything like that. This is my opinion, of course, but I think you'll agree when we start scripting. So awk comes from AT&T Labs, as many other things did back in the day. It stands for Aho, Weinberger, and Kernighan, who were the creators of awk. It's important to note that awk is different from Solaris's nawk, which is new awk, and it's also different from gawk, but many commands are the same, so this is a great starting point. So one last thing you have to be careful of is making sure of which shell you're in. The syntax is a little different for each one, like if you're in bash or the C shell or anything else. So before we begin the actual scripting, let's take a look at the structure of an awk command. First there is a pattern, and then there is a action for that pattern, which is pretty simple. So it looks like a typical Unix command. I have a book I'm using for learning Unix commands as well as awk, and that is the Guide to Unix Using Linux. There are some good examples in there as well, so check that out. But for this video I want to cover the basics and give you a feel for how awk works and why it can be so powerful, so let's make this a little more interesting here and apply it to code. So this is Cygwin. It's a way to run native Linux applications on Windows. It works okay, it's pretty good for learning purposes, but if you install it, make sure you find a tutorial on which packages to install. For the book I mentioned, I needed quite a few commands like grep and sed, more things like that. So anyways, let's start looking at some awk commands in here. We can start by making a simple command that converts Fahrenheit to Celsius. It may look a little like C to you, but it's different and much simpler, which is a good and a bad thing. There are some pretty loose rules for awk. You need to be exactly sure what you're declaring as a variable and just keep track of it very well. It may take several methods to call in on C. Here we're just going to write this in one line, so here it is. So let's take a look at what this actually is. Awk at the beginning obviously calls the awk command, single quote, curly brace enclose our commands when it's executed, so it's going straight to those commands. The print command may look familiar to you. It is saying to display the result of the following calculations on the screen. This happens all at the same time. So this is actually very helpful to know because it sets the following numbers 1 through 32 as a field. Then within that field is multiplied by 5 divided by 9, which is the official way to calculate this temperature. And then we have to close the command. So here I typed in 50 and then I pressed enter and it came up with 10, which is in fact the correct temperature. And there's no end of file, so to exit that I just pressed Ctrl C and then close out that Cygwin window. So like I said before, just keep track of what you're declaring. With awk, a string can actually be a word or a number, so you're not declaring it as anything else right now. So we're going to use the echo command, which will keep our strings for us. So this is actually a command to concatenate two strings. In other words, that means just perform an operation with them, like add or subtract. So here we're going to add the numbers 7 and 4 and see if we can get it to come back with the correct answer. So as you can see, we have the echo and then the bar, which, echo is going to hold it for us. So just be aware of your spaces. They're used as the default delimiter unless you specify another one with the F option. So then it could be whatever you choose, but for now we're just going to use spaces. These are going to separate 7 and 4. That's how the strings are declared. You don't have to do anything else to declare strings. So we have our bar, which is going to keep that over there for us, and then we're going to have our awk command, and then print. Looks familiar. We have it in our braces so it knows exactly where to go to. And then remember, when accessing a variable, you have to call in the $sign. So then the operator plus is going to add those two variables together. So the first one would be 7, and the second one would be 4, which is what we declared. So then we're going to close it out with our braces. I know it takes a little getting used to declaring your variables. And here you can see I pressed enter and it came up with 11, which I certainly hope is the right answer. Okay, so now we've written two really simple programs with awk. Hopefully it gives you a feel of how it works and why it's used so much. It's generally preferable for column-based operations. This is really what it was made for. So for example, you need to get the data from the second column out of a file and other things like that. Finally, let's get a summary by looking at a more complete command. Okay, so awk to start the program. Like I said before, we can change the delimiter so that the output will be separated by something other than a space. So the F option calls that, and then the comma afterward tells us we want commas in between the results. So the $3 says let's get the data from the third column because that is how awk works by columns. Okay, now let's say our boss wants the results from column 3, which may be something like our quarterly profits, and and he wants it on his desk and something he can read and understand without all the other data. So instead of using a graphical interface like Windows where we have to click and drag, copy and paste, all we have to do here is press enter. So we are going to output this to another file so we can print this out for him. In this example it's called output1.txt, but it could really be anything you want because it will be created on the spot. And you can see it's just like Linux command. So that's a basic introduction to Awk. It's very important to have conceptual understanding of how this works before jumping into all the options like /t, separate with tab, a million other things like that. If you have the Unix books I mentioned, it's good for learning those options, but it might miss some of the core basics of Awk, which might be why it seems so confusing at the start. So I hope this helps, and hopefully you will see why Awk is really helpful to managing data and doing other things. Thanks. Bye.